Thanks for watching. I'm Jim Falk. There is an aggressive campaign afoot to revolutionize the automobile industry to get us, the consumer, to ditch combustion engine gasoline-powered vehicles in favor of EVs, electric vehicles. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, price cuts, and new, less pricey models are all part of the strategy. But will it work? Time will tell. While these incentives may spur demand, there are also headwinds that may stall, if not derail, growth, and the most important of these surround the battery, which is complicated and expensive. To discuss what we may expect in the showroom and whether or not batteries can keep up with demand, we are joined by Steve LeVine, the editor of The Electric, a leading online publication owned by The Information, and is the author of 3 books, the most recent of which is The Powerhouse, America, China, and the Great Battery War, and Tony Quiroga. He is the editor-in-chief of Car and Driver magazine. Great to have you both with us. So, Steve, you are probably one of the most astute observers of the oil and gas industry, and now you're focusing on batteries. And I just wonder, have we not traded our dependence on Middle East oil barons, autocrats, now to reliance on China for the rare earth materials that we need to manufacture these batteries?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the short answer is that for at least 10 or 15 years, the answer is most certainly yes. And the replacement for now for OPEC would be China. China is by far the dominant actor in the battery space, in the EV space. It has spent the last 10 to 15 years assembling a chain of an industry that goes from the mine all the way to the battery. And we haven't been doing that. The United States and Europe have not been doing that. So for now, China is running very, very quickly in this industry, and we're of course in technological conflict with China.
And that is certainly a challenge to all of this. But another challenge, Tony, is the high price of EVs. What is it? 57, 60,000 is sort of the average price. What do we expect to see in 2023?
Well, there are going to be more EVs coming to the market, and the average price of a car, of any car right now, is around $48,000. And right now there have been an influx. Chevy was pretty early with the Bolt and the Bolt EUV, which are available for around $27,000 before they get their tax credit from the Inflation Reduction Act. And then Kia and Hyundai have also introduced new models that start in the low 40s. The Kia EV6 and the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which was actually our EV of the year winner last year, start in the low 40s. They offer good range, between 200 and 250 miles. They offer quick charging times. So these are the first sort of forays into long distance EVs, long range EVs. And of course, there's the Tesla Model 3, which recently had a price reduction too. So the market on that side is starting to shift from the very expensive stuff, but there continue to be very expensive EVs on the other side of that as well.
Let's talk about price reductions, because if I had bought a Tesla Model S, say 6 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever, even in January, it seems like Elon Musk keeps on dropping the price dramatically. And from what I understand, he's not making good on what I might have paid earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's bringing the prices of his EVs down, sort of fighting against the legacy car makers, as they've been dubbed, the onslaught that he's getting in competition from them. If he can steer those buyers away, he won't lose market share as quickly. While he is probably going to be losing market share over the next few years, the EV space in general is growing so quickly that his sales are going to increase despite losing market share to quote unquote legacy brands.
So one of the things, Steve, in reading your email newsletter and so forth, is I realized just how complicated this is. I'm going to give you a real challenge. Tell us as simply as you can for the lay audience about why batteries are so complicated.
What we want the battery to do in an EV, that's what makes the challenge of creating a battery that works in a commercial EV so hard. So we want the car, Tony mentioned 225, 250 miles. Really what people want is 300 miles minimum. And I think that will be the standard. And so you've got, you've got to make a vehicle that a battery that has the density to take a vehicle that far. But we also want our cars to go quickly off the mark. We want acceleration. These are in conflict. These two things, range and power, acceleration. And so you have to balance those two things in the battery. We also want to charge fast. We don't want to wait 8 hours, 5 hours, even 1 hour in a charging station. We would like to be in and out in 15 minutes. And so those three things, and then you add a fourth, we don't want, while we're driving, the car to catch on fire. And so that's another thing that's in conflict with the other three things. So the folks who are in inventing and optimizing batteries have to work in all of that, and and we also have to consider that the critical minerals that go into the battery haven't been mined at the scale needed to produce the number of EVs we think are going to be sold. We're going to have a shortage for the whole decade of lithium and nickel. That will constrain, how many EVs can be made.
And I want to get back to that in a minute, but one of the things that I'm perplexed by, all right, I want to buy an EV, so I think about body style, price, acceleration. Do I have a choice, Tony, of what type of battery that I'm going to get? And is that something that, are there options, and should I take that into consideration?
Right now, it's fairly standardized. Everyone's using lithium-ion batteries in their EVs right now. So basically, you'd be looking at range and what sort of range works for your duty cycle, for your commute, for your life. Is it going to be a second car? Is it going to be a first car? I think those are really the decisions that you would be looking at as a shopper of an EV. Is basically how far can you go and how quickly can you charge it?
Now, another obstacle that I've been reading about is just the weight of the cars, and that what the F-150 now that is electric, the model you can buy, weighs like 8,000 pounds or something like that. And even some garages aren't structurally sound to be able to take the additional weight. And how are we addressing issues like that?
I think it's largely being ignored. I mean, EVs are really heavy. I mean, you have an incredibly heavy battery pack. Fortunately, that battery pack is very low in the car, which helps handling stability, which helps the car, stay stable. But cars like the Lightning that you mentioned, and even the Hummer EV pickup truck and SUV are massively heavy. I mean, these are 9,500 pound vehicles. And, if you're hitting another object, if you're hitting another car in that large of a vehicle, you're going to cause some destruction, which is sort of a safety issue.
So one of the things, Steve, that you've talked about is the life of a battery. And right now, what is the lifespan that you typically get on a warranty? Is it 10 years for a car? Is it something like that, Tony?
Yeah, I think it's mandated, and at least in California, it's mandated to be 10 years.
So now you're talking about batteries that may go, 300,000 miles, or the Century battery? Is that even realistic? And why do I want a battery that's going to last 100 years?
So I wanted to say first, just in 15 seconds, that you do have a choice of battery. And I think this is going to be a selling point, that cars are going to brand themselves according to what battery is into it. And status, when you buy a car, you're going to have status in your neighborhood. I've got a car that has a lithium metal anode or a silicon anode, and there's going to be, and you'll see cars that have an S or an L at the end, and they will refer to the type of battery in there. I'd love to hear what Tony thinks about that. That's my feeling. But on the Million Mile battery, batteries are lasting a lot longer than was expected. The EVs that were sold in the teens. The batteries in those cars are still going. Their capacity has not fallen below 80%. 80% is the point at which they're regarded as dead. And so, batteries are going to last, cars are going to last a long time, but there is a movement to create a million-mile battery. GM says its Ultium battery will last a million miles. And the reason you want this is that there is a sort of a holistic approach in which a city's grid, the power grid, and the EVs in that city would be connected in one system. When you park your car, you go to work, you plug in your EV, and you are now part of that power system. If you think that your vehicle, your battery is only going to last for 10 years, you're not going to plug in. You're going to.
So let me ask Tony this question. Tony, do you think when people come into the showroom, they're thinking about that?
Maybe they might be thinking about it in the future. And in terms of the battery technology, I think that will be a point of interest and it may become a bragging right. But I think where the battery materials were sourced also will become important to consumers. And especially not just because of the tax credit that they could receive if the batteries are sourced domestically, but also because there's sort of a pride in it. And as you mentioned earlier, China's sort of ahead of the game. We're playing catch up to some degree. And, if we do catch up, if we make enough batteries at home, that could definitely be a source of pride.
Steve, how did we get so far behind China on this issue? I mean, here we are, a country that prides itself on entrepreneurship, innovation, and yet we're just behind, aren't we?
Yeah. Yes. We started out in the same place around 2009 to 2010. China and the U.S. Declared EVs and batteries a technology of the future that they wanted to own, and they got into competition. But we got caught up in a political fight in which EVs were branded Obama mobiles, and basically we stopped competing in around 2012. China kept going. Elon Musk kept going. So today, the leading actors in EVs and batteries are China and Tesla.
And so we talk a lot about rare earth materials that are used not just for the batteries, but also for the motors. And I understand that we do have access to some of these materials here. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But where are these materials coming from, and how did China develop such really a monopoly on this? Just like Saudi Arabia with oil.
Yeah, it's the same thing as with the rest of the supply chain. China has been willing to mine and, more importantly, process, refine the rare earths. A very dirty, in environmentally damaging process. So neodymium is the primary rare earth mineral that's in permanent magnets, that's in EV motors, and it's also in F-35 jets. And China controls the production both of the mineral and of the permanent magnets. The most recent thing that we've heard was about 2 weeks ago, there was a report that China, over the coming couple of months, is going to clamp an export ban on these rare earth magnets, and that's a threat. That's a threat to the U.S. Hope of establishing its own EV industry. I think we should also view it as a kind of a shot over the bow. Okay, we're clamping down on the export of semiconductor chips to China. They also have leverage.
The Inflation Reduction Act came out in August of last year. How has that helped spur sales? And also, I'm curious about the used car market, because that was a new and important component of the Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, it's helped some players for sure. It's helped players who build their cars in the United States. The credit fully applies to them. There's still a lot up in the air about battery sourcing and how the credits will apply, and there's still some fighting going back and forth. It has impacted some of the Korean brands, at least in the short term, because their vehicles end up being a little bit more expensive than something like a Chevy Bolt, which enjoys the large tax credit, whereas the other ones don't enjoy the tax credit. So you're ending up, I mean, if you stop paying people to buy cars, they're going to stop buying those cars.
What should the percentage be, or the rule of thumb, of what the cost of the battery should be versus the overall cost of the vehicle? Is there one?
Well, I mean, batteries are very expensive. I mean, it's the most expensive part of the vehicle. But as prices continue to fall per kilowatt hour, we're going to see less and less expensive EVs. They're also mitigating some of that because some manufacturers have decided to build EVs on a separate platform, sort of branching off away from internal combustion cars. Some manufacturers have experimented with that and decided the way forward, at least in this transition period, is to build a single platform that can have an internal combustion engine, a hybrid version, let's say a plug-in hybrid version, and even a full battery version. And then using that, they can sort of tailor production and sort of manage costs a little bit better than a dedicated EV platform, which can be optimized for range, aerodynamics, et cetera, but is also very expensive. And those costs eventually get passed on to the consumer.
Tony, I heard somebody say recently on a news show that this is really a once-in-a-century industrial revolution. Are we ready for it?
I don't know. I mean, there's so many variables. They're just variable after variable after variable. Things change all the time. Geopolitical climates change. There's so many things. But I think the thing that will really make it happen is the day that there are EVs that can do exactly what a gas car can do. I mean, American consumers aren't stupid. If the new thing doesn't do what the old thing did, they're going to hold on to the old thing for a while. And that's sort of at the crux of this. When you can charge as quickly as you can stop at a gas station, when the charging infrastructure is as good as gas station infrastructure, and when the car can go as quickly and reliably, and you don't have to think about it in the same way you don't think about your internal combustion car, I think that's when people will really make the switch in earnest.
What manufacturers, Tony, are really gearing up their EV production?
Pretty much everybody. Definitely the domestics are. Kia, Hyundai are. The Koreans are. The Japanese have been a little bit slow to fully adopt battery electric vehicles. A lot of their vehicles, they've gone with a strategy of doing hybrids and plug-in hybrids. And some of their thinking is, instead of producing one battery electric vehicle, full battery electric vehicle battery, they could produce 7, 8, 9 plug-in hybrids, or they could produce 90 hybrids. And their argument is that they can, the CO2 benefit from all of those hybrids beats the one EV. But that's not a long-term plan, I don't think, because, government regulations are coming, which are going to, encourage battery electric vehicles in a way and sort of mandate them in a way that that's probably not a long-term solution.
Tony, is there any outlier out there who's saying, this is happening too fast, we're going to stick with tried and true gas car?
Toyota Lexus was doing that a bit, but they do have EVs on the market. They're selling EVs, but they're sort of through this transition period where everyone's sort of learning very quickly about where they're going to source their batteries, how they're going to build EVs, and what the market appetite is at this point. They're sort of going with, I mean, they're still doing plenty of battery research and working towards solid state batteries. But at the same time, they're sort of waiting this period out a little bit, seeing where everything goes and offering consumers cars that they still want to buy. I mean, people want to buy hybrids, people want to buy plug-in hybrids, and it works for a lot of people during this transition period.
Steve, I just get this feeling, having once had an 8-track in a tape player in my car, that the technology is moving so fast that what we're seeing today with batteries might be obsolete in 2 to 5 years. Is there any justification to my concern?
Battery development, it's not like electronics. It moves very slowly. And so I think people are accustomed to how quickly iPhones evolve, or recording devices, just like you just said, web beta cams, the whole thing to video camera. Batteries are much slower. The current system, lithium ion batteries, nickel lead batteries, iron lead batteries, this is what we're going to have for the next decade, 2 decades. Probably you're not going to have, even the types of batteries that are the next gen batteries, they're still lithium ion. There's just some different materials put in, but everything we're discussing, no one, the one person who hasn't had a vote in what is going to happen over the next decade or two is the consumer. We don't know how the consumer is going to react. Will consumers actually want hybrids and not full electric cars? The Biden administration has just announced it's accelerating the pathway to EVs. It wants 67% of new cars sold by 2032 to be electric. We'll speak again, Jim and Tony, in 9 years. My bet is that won't happen. But how you could get there is hybrid. 67% of the new vehicles sold are not combustion. There's some form of electric, hybrid or plug-in hybrid or EV.
Tony, who's really the leader with hybrids now? Because we've been talking mostly in this conversation about EVs, but Steve keeps on stressing the flexibility of a hybrid.
Well, I think, Toyota and Lexus, they've been doing it the longest. They definitely have a lot of great cars in that space. But basically, every brand on the market has a plug-in hybrid. They have hybrids. They have, everyone's going after fuel economy, so they've had to be building these for a long time. But I would say, to answer your question, Toyota, Lexus have probably the longest experience in it.
Are these batteries recycled, Steve? When a car is in an accident, what happens to the battery if the battery is not damaged?
Yeah, there is a nascent recycling industry. Redwood Materials, Li-Cycle, these are the two big American companies. The Chinese also have one. So this is in play, but generally speaking, EVs haven't been around long enough for there to be a critical mass of batteries to recycle. It is a question that I get every time I'm in front of an audience. People really are concerned about recycling, and I can tell you that is something that the car makers are incorporating into their plan. There's this notion of a circular economy. We spend the next, say, 3 decades scaling up the EV and battery industry, and then mining the nickel, mining the manganese, and so on. After that, it takes on a life of its own. The recycling of the existing batteries then is pumped back into the system, and much less new mining has to be done.
Well, I think we all know that relations between the United States and China have reached a new low, and the Inflation Reduction Act certainly put a lot of emphasis on Buy America, Manufacture in America. But Steve, there were some announcements, I guess it was in March or early April of this year, about some joint ventures between China and the United States on battery production. Tell us briefly about how that happened, and how is that not contrary to the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah, so we are we have two conflicting goals, and certain states, that happened in Michigan. So certain states, the whole in former industrial belt, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, have been down on their luck. Jobs have left these states. And so you had 2 big Chinese battery companies, CATL and Gotion, come in and offer Michigan, we're willing to set up big battery factories in your state employing thousands of people. This is the technology of the future. And Michigan jumped on these. And this is we have an election coming up in 2024. Do you want to be re-elected? And in that calculus, what's more important in the voter's mind? Jobs. Or China?
Absolutely. Yeah. All righty. Tony, I'm going to put you on the spot. So the administration has, right now in January, I think the 7% of the cars sold were EVs. When we look at the end of 2023, what percentage do you think we'll see? Give me a number.
That's an interesting question. I mean, we've seen it rising in California. And, the old thing.
Give me a number. I got 30 seconds. I got 10 seconds. Give me a number.
I'm gonna go with 8.3%.
That's a good one. All right, we'll come back and talk about that. Want to thank you both for being with us. You've really opened up a lot of lines for us to continue to think about this and discuss it. And on the positive side, we've heard that U.S. automobile manufacturers will soon be offering consumers a very wide and growing choice of vehicles with a lower price point that will certainly widen the base, allowing those with lower incomes to go electric. But we've also learned that China's strategy of securing critical commodities needed for the production of batteries, electric converters, etc., is giving it a unique advantage, forcing us in the United States to play catch-up. From my perspective, to win this decade's geostrategic race, the private and public sector must work together, or we may just find ourselves sitting outside, dependent on other countries, such as we have often found ourselves with oil. Thank you so much for joining today's discussion, where we talk about things that matter with people who care. I'll see you next time.